Today I'm going to show you how I did this seascape using Derwent Inktense. Hi, Shannon Rowe Jackson here from Caution Our Set Play, and I finally got myself some Inktense blocks. Look at all these colors. I'm super excited. The 72 set in the tin. And this is Lisa Clow's art from La Cree Fine Art on the tin, which makes me even more excited because I love her work. And I'm just going to open it and we're going to look at all the colors. Gorgeous amount of colors. I can't even, I'm so excited. And I have to apologize if this doesn't line up directly. I had done a voiceover when I originally filmed it, but there was too much noise in the background. So here I'm just looking, doing a close-up of the block. And you can see the writing on it, like it tells you that it's Derwent Inktense. It has the number of the color that it corresponds with. And it actually kind of feels a little bit like a hard pastel, like I actually got some blue on my fingers. And now we're going to look at the second tray. And originally I had an awesome, very satisfying unboxing and unpackaging of this with me taking the plastic off, and it didn't record correctly, so technical difficulties on this end. Look at all these earth tones. This excites me so much. All these pretty colors. And I've had the Inktense pencils for years, but this is the first time I've used the blocks. And I finally got to the point where I was able to invest in them. And I am super excited about that. So for paper, I'm going to use the Strathmore Mixed Media 400 series. And it just comes in a pad. This is one of my all-time favorite papers. And I'm also using some of the Inktense pencils, as you can see here, which, as I mentioned, I've had for a long time. And so what I'm doing here is I have my paper taped right down directly to my table. And I'm going through with my Inktense pencil and I'm drawing out my scene. Because I know that this blue pencil is just going to dissolve into the rest of the painting. So instead of using graphite or anything like that, I'm using the water-soluble pencil. And that piece of tape there is just to represent my horizon line so that when I go in with the sky, it'll create a nice straight horizon line. So now I'm using the side of the block to block in some colors. And then I go back in with the pencil just to define some of my clouds a little bit. So you'll see me going back and forth between the pencils and the blocks. And they work great together. And I'm going to use multiple techniques with these blocks. I'm going to use them directly on the paper sometimes, and then other times I will be wetting my paintbrush and swiping them directly on the block to get a watercolor effect, and then other times I'll be shredding some of the pigment off of the block onto a makeshift palette and then picking that up with water. So I'll be experimenting quite a bit just to see what I can do with these blocks. And right now I'm just laying in the clouds. It's pretty messy, but I know that I'm going to be able to go in later and pick some of it up. So what I am doing here, you see me with paper towel lifting. Now, generally speaking, once these are fully dry, you shouldn't be able to lift them. But that is if you have fully, if you fully dissolved the pigment already, then once they dry, they can't be lifted or re-wetted. However, I'm purposely leaving some of the pigment undissolved so that later on I can wet it and lift it immediately after. So when you see me using the lifting technique, it's when I have immediately wet the pigment. It's not after I have wet it and then let it re-dry, if that makes sense. Because these are pretty permanent. And that's a trick that I learned just by using the pencils. That if you go in soon enough, you can still use the lifting technique. And right now, I'm going in and I'm just doing the darkest part of the darkest parts of the water. And I'm just going to lay in my lines that represent little waves. And as you can tell, the waves get closer together as they get further away, and then they get further apart as they get closer. And that helps with perspective. So all I did there was I used my darker color and I laid in the waves, and instead of picking up any pigment and painting more blue over those waves, I'm just using the color from those waves to create the base color of my water. So I didn't add any more blue. All I did was put in those dark lines, and then I took a clean wet paintbrush and went over it, and it created the lighter parts of the water. So I thought that that was a pretty fun technique to use, and I thought it was pretty effective. So these really go a long way. Now I'm blocking in my waves that are in the front. And I am not somebody who has done a whole lot of waves, so I may not be the best person to give you a tutorial, but I can show you what I did in this piece. And it's pretty much a lot of experimenting, going back and forth. I'm laying in a lot of the shadows first, similarly to what I did in the back part of the water, and I'm going over it with light washes to bring out the lighter parts. And as you'll see later, I'm going to define that wave quite a bit by using darker colors towards the ridge of the wave itself, and then, you know, obviously lighter colors for highlights. The darkest part of the water is going to be that wave that's getting ready to break. So I'm going through and I'm just laying in some pigment. I'm not using a whole lot. I don't have to cover the whole page to do it. A little goes a long way. And as you can see, I'm just defining those waves. I'm looking at the direction of the waves using a lot of horizontal lines and a lot of triangular type shapes for the parts of the waves that are kind of coming up further. Just to kind of give that indication. I'm looking for abstract shapes to get those waves in there. I'm leaving a lot of the white of the paper, but I'm not leaving it completely because there's still a little bit of definition in those waves in between. So I'm pretty much just taking a little bit of pigment from another area and wiping them in areas of the white just to kind of create some definition in there, but I don't want it to be so blue that it matches the rest of the water. I still want those waves in the back to appear as white. And another tool that you'll end up seeing me use is the Faber-Castell Pitt Pen, and it's the opaque white. I use that for larger areas of waves and to bring some of my white out where I lose it. The white Inktense block works really well. It's pretty opaque, and it works really well for my thinner lines that I'm doing, but I needed something where I could use, you know, a lot at once. So in this area where the wave is breaking and there's a lot of foam, you can see I've put a base layer of a light blue down, and I'm going in with the darker blue so that I can leave the white to indicate the foam and the different squiggles and different shapes. And I'm paying close attention to my abstract shapes there as well to try and get a more organic feel to that foam. So back to what I was saying about using the white Pitt pen with Inktense. I think that the white Pitt pen works really well with the Inktense because it was made to be used with water-based inks, such as what is used in the Pitt pen line. So it actually works really well with Inktense as well. And this is actually, on the side of the pen, says that it is an opaque India ink, which I didn't know that white India ink ever existed until I bought these pens. It feels very similar to acrylic. But it does work well with Inktense because it is another water-based media. And it's made, as I said, to be used with water-based markers, which is, you know, the Pitt pen line. I often use Inktense and Pitt pens together, especially when I'm doing illustrative work. So you'll see me going back and forth between brush, pencil, and block, and Pitt pen. I'm just laying in that foam there. See how opaque that is? So satisfying. And again, I'm doing the lifting technique. Going in to define some of the waves with the pencils. I think it's great to have both the pencils and the blocks. I've been wanting the blocks forever, and I'm so excited that I finally invested in them. Like, I'm in love. This was pretty much my tester piece just to see what I could do with the blocks. I already had experience with the pencils, and they really go hand in hand. There's like so much that could be done with them when you have both. It's so versatile. I mean, it's a versatile media to begin with, but I really think that getting the blocks is going to make my life so much easier. So now I'm just going in and starting to define some of those rocks, and then I'm fixing some of the foamy parts of the waves. And one tip that I can give when doing water is you want it to be lighter towards the horizon line and darker towards the viewer or towards the bottom of the page. because the horizon line is closer to the sky and it has more atmospheric perspective, so there's more air and atmosphere between the viewer and the horizon line. So that's something to keep in mind whenever doing an ocean. Plus you have the light of the sky reflecting on the water. And as you can see, I'm going in there with my Pitt pen and just kind of bringing out some of the whites of the clouds again. And the sky was one I did from imagination, because the reference photo that I had is one that I took a few years ago when my husband and I went to the beach, but it was kind of a plain sky, and I'm someone who really loves white fluffy clouds, so I ended up just doing the sky from imagination and then using my reference for the water and the rocks. And now I'm just going in and laying in those rocks. I'm using darker blues and browns for the rocks. I want to bring some of that watercolor into the shadow of those rocks to try and unify it a little bit more. And even in the foreground rocks, which are a little bit warmer, you'll see me use some blues in the shadows. So I basically just went in and laid down my base color, and now I'm wetting it down and letting it wash out. And then I'm going to come back in with my details. And the good thing about this is that the Inktense pencils work a lot like regular colored pencil as far as details go. So I can come in after and burnish some highlights on with my pencils and put in those dark crevices and get the fine detail. And in some of the texture of the rock, I'm letting the staticky colored pencil look come through. Instead of blending out my colored pencil, or well, my Inktense pencil with water or burnishing it, I am just letting the paper texture show through to create that rough look of rocks. Similar to what I do for bark and for other rough textures in nature. I'm just putting in some of the shadows and looking at my reference photo, going back and forth. And it doesn't have to be exact because it's nature. Rocks aren't perfect. You can still get something convincing without it being completely reliant on the reference photo. There's some details that I'm leaving out, and then I'm adding extra details where I think that it might need it just to create a more balanced piece. This piece is actually part of a larger illustration project that I'm working on. Something that I've written and I'm illustrating myself, which I'll speak more about later when I'm able to. See, I'm going in with a dark blue now and kind of defining some of those rocks. I'm not using a whole lot of black in this at all. I think I do use a little bit, but mostly I am using the combination of a dark brown and a dark blue. I'm going in with my white pencil and going over it to do highlights. The white pencil isn't very opaque, but I don't need it to be for this because I want the color of the rock to show through. I don't want the highlights on the rocks to be completely white. I want them to be a combination of the rock color and the sky reflecting on them. So a translucent white works really well for something like that. I'm going in and putting some of those crevices in. And as you can see, I'm using some grays and blues and dark browns to do that. There is a nice dark gray. I can't remember the exact name of the pencil. I'm really awful when it comes to color names. But there's a really nice... It might actually even be Payne's Gray. It might be a Payne's Gray Inktense block and pencil that works really well for this because Payne's Gray tends to have a blue color to it. And here is the final piece. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you learned something. I can say that I highly recommend these Inktense blocks. I'm super excited. I think my life has gotten so much easier. There's so many different techniques that you can use, from watercolor techniques to coloring it directly on and using pastel-like techniques, and they layer endlessly, so I definitely recommend it. I want to say that this video is not sponsored in any way. All the materials in this video I bought myself. They just happen to be materials that I'm using, and I want to share it with you. Thank you for watching. Bye. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like what you see, please hit subscribe. Also, if you're interested in seeing more of my artwork, I'm on social media, so check out the links in the description below.